Elida projected surrender. It was a charade. What would come, and she still had secured no hold on the Althor boy. To think she had once had him right under her hand. If only she had known then. Curse Alviarin and that triply cursed proclamation calling anathema on anyone who approached him save through the tower. She would have recalled it, except that would seem weak. And in any case, the damage had been done beyond simple amendment. Still, soon she would have Elaine back in hand, and the royal house of Andor was the key to winning Tarmangaia. That she had foretold long ago. And news of rebellion against the Shonchan sweeping across Tarabon had been very pleasant reading. Not everything was a of briars, statues. Scanning the second report, she grimaced. No one liked sewers, yet they were 1/3 of the life's blood of a city, the other 2 being trade and clean water. Without the sewers, Tar Valon would become prey to a dozen diseases, overwhelming anything the sisters could do, not to mention even more malodorous than the rotting garbage must have made the streets already. Though trade was cut to a trickle for the moment, the water still came in at the upriver end of the island and was distributed to water towers throughout the city, then to fountains, ornamental and plain, that anyone was free to use. But now it seemed the sewer outlets on the downriver end of the island were nearly clogged. Dipping her pen in the ink jar, she scrawled, "I want these cleared by tomorrow," across the top of the page, and signed her name below. If the clerks had any sense, the work was already underway. But she never accused clerks of having much sense. The next report made her own eyebrows rise. Rats inside the tower? That was beyond serious. This should have been on top. Have someone check the wards, Tarna. Those wardings had held since the tower was built. But perhaps they could have weakened after 3,000 years. How many of those rats were the Dark One's spies? A rap came at the door, followed an instant later by a plump accepted named Anamara, who spread her striped skirts in a deep curtsy. "If it pleases you, mother, Falana Sedai and Nagain Sedai have brought a woman to you they found wandering in the tower. They say she wants to present a petition to the Amerlin seat." "Tell her to wait and offer her tea, Anamara," Tarna said briskly. "The mother is busy." No, Elida broke in. "Send them in, child, send them in." It had been too long since anyone had come to present her with a petition. She was of a mind to grant whatever it was, if it was not too ridiculous. Perhaps that would restart the flow. It was far too long since any sisters had come to her without being summoned too. Perhaps the 2 Browns would end that drought as well. But only one woman entered the room, carefully closing the door behind her. By her silk riding dress and good cloak, she appeared to be a noblewoman or a prosperous merchant, a supposition supported by her confident manner. Elida was sure she had never met the woman before, yet there seemed something vaguely familiar about that face, framed by hair even fairer than Tarna's. Elida stood and started around the table, hands outstretched and an unaccustomed smile on her face. She tried to make it seem welcoming. "I understand that you have a petition for me, my daughter. Tarna, pour her some tea." The silver pot sitting on a silver tray atop the side table must still be at least warm. "The petition, it was something I let them believe in order to reach you unbruised, mother," the woman replied in Tarabonner accents, curtsying, and halfway through that, her face was suddenly that of Bayanin Meridian. Embracing Saidar, Tarna wove a shield on the woman, but Elida contented herself with planting her fists on her hips. "To say that I'm surprised you dare show me your face would be an understatement, Bayanin. I managed to become part of what you might call the ruling council in Salidar," the Grey said calmly. "I made sure they sat there and did nothing, and I put the rumors about that many among them were in truth your secret adherents. The sisters, they were looking at one another with so much suspicion, I think me most might have returned to the tower soon at that point. But then other sitters beside the Blues appeared. The next I knew, they had chosen their own hall of the tower, and the ruling council, it was done. Still, I continued to do what I could. I know that you commanded me to remain with them until they were all ready to return, but that must happen within days now. If I may say, Mother, it was the most excellent decision not to try Egwene. For one thing, she has the genius for discovering new weaves, even better than Elaine Trakand or Nynaeve Almira. For another, before they raised her, Lelaine and Ramonda struggled with one another to be named Amerlin. With Egwene alive, they will struggle again, but neither can succeed. Yes? Me, I think very soon now, sisters will begin following behind me. In a week or two, Lelaine and Ramonda will find themselves alone with the remainder of their so-called home. How did you know the Alvear girl wasn't to be tried? Elida demanded. How did you know she's even alive? Unshield her, Tarna. Tarna complied, and Bayanin gave her a nod as if in gratitude. A small gratitude. Those large blue-gray eyes might make Bayanin appear constantly startled, but she was a very composed woman. Combine composure with a wholehearted dedication to the law, and also ambition, which she possessed in as great a measure, and Elida had known immediately that Bayanin was the one to send off after the sisters fleeing the tower. And the woman had failed utterly. Oh, she had apparently sowed a little dissension, but really she had achieved nothing of what Elida had expected from her. Nothing. She would find her rewards commensurate with her failure. Egwene, she can enter Tel'aran'rhiod simply by going to sleep, Mother. I myself have been there and seen her, but I must use a Turon Royal. I could not acquire any of those the rebels have to bring with me. In any event, she spoke to Swan Sanche in her dreams, it is claimed, though I think more likely in the world of dreams. Apparently she said that she is a prisoner, but she would not tell where, and she forbade any rescue attempt. May I pour myself that tea? Elida was so stunned she could not speak. She motioned Bayanin to the side table, and the Grey curtsied again before going over to feel the silver pitcher cautiously with the back of her hand. The girl could enter Tel'aran'rhiod? And there were Turon that allowed the same thing? The world of dreams was almost a legend. And according to those troubling scraps the Ajahs had deigned to share with her, the girl had rediscovered the weave for traveling, and made any number of other discoveries as well. They had been the determining factor in her decision to preserve the girl for the tower, but this on top of it? If Egwene can do this, Mother, perhaps she really is a dreamer, Tarna said. The warning she gave Sylviana is useless, Tarna. The Shan are still deep in Altara and barely touching Ilion. At least the Ajahs were still willing to pass on everything they learned of the Shan. Or rather, she hoped they passed on everything. The thought roughened her voice. Unless they learn to travel, can you think of any precaution I need to take beyond what is already in place? She could not, of course. The girl had forbidden a rescue. That was good on the face of it, but it indicated she still thought of herself as Amberlin. Well, Sylviana would remove that nonsense from her head soon enough if the sisters teaching her classes failed. Can she be fed enough of that potion to keep her out of Tel'aran'rhiod? Tarna grimaced slightly. No one liked that vile brew, even the Browns who had brought themselves to test it, and shook her head. We can make her sleep through the night, but she would be useless for anything the next day, and who can say whether it would affect this ability of hers? May I pour for you, Mother? Bayanin said, balancing a thin white teacup on her fingertips. Tarna? The most important news I have. I don't care for any tea, Elida said harshly. Did you bring back anything to save your skin from your miserable failure? Do you know the weave for traveling, or the skimming, or... There were so many. Perhaps they were all talents and skills that had been lost, but apparently most had not been named yet. Gray peered at her across the teacup, her face very still. Yes, she said at last. I cannot make Quendiar, but I can make the new healing weaves work as well as most sisters, and I know them all. An edge of excitement crept into her voice. Most marvelous is traveling. Without asking permission, she embraced the source and wove spirit. A vertical line of silver appeared against one wall and widened into a view of snow-covered oaks. A cold breeze blew into the room, making the flames dance in the fireplace. That is called a gateway. It can only be used to reach a place you know well, but you learn a place by making a gateway there, and to go somewhere you do not know well, you use skimming. She altered the weave, and the opening dwindled into that silvery line once more, then widened again. The oaks were replaced by blackness, and a gray painted barge, railed and gated, that floated on nothing against the opening. "Release the weave," Elida said. She had the feeling that if she walked over to that barge, the darkness would extend as far as she could see in any direction, that she could fall in it forever. It made her queasy. The opening, the gateway, vanished. The memory remained, however. Resuming her seat behind the table, she opened the largest of the lacquered boxes, decorated with red roses and golden scroll-work. From the top tray she picked up a small ivory carving, a fork-tailed swallow, dark yellow with years, and stroked her thumb along the curved leaf. "You will not teach these things to anyone without receiving my permission." "But why ever not, Mother?" "Some of the Ajas oppose the Mother almost as strongly as those sisters beyond the river," Tarna said. Elida shot a dark look at her keeper, but that cool visage absorbed it without changing a hair. "I will decide who is reliable enough to be taught, Bayanin. I want your promise. No, I want your oath. On my way here, I saw sisters of different Ajas glaring at one another. Glaring. What has happened in the tower, Mother?" "Your oath, Bayanin." The woman stood peering into her teacup long enough that Elida was beginning to think she would refuse. But ambition won out. She had tied herself to Elida's skirts in the hope of preferment, and she would not abandon that now. "Under the light and by my hope of salvation and rebirth, I swear that I will teach the weaves I learned among the rebels to no one, without the permission of the Amarins." She paused, taking a sip from the cup. "Some sisters in the tower, they are perhaps less reliable than you think. I tried to stop it, but that ruling council sent 10 sisters to return to the tower and spread the tale of the Red Aja and Loghain." Elida recognized few of the names she reeled off, until the last. That one made her sit bolt upright. "Shall I have them arrested, Mother?" Tarna asked, still as chill as ice. "No. Have them watched. Watch whoever they associate with." So there was a conduit between the Ajas inside the tower and the rebels. How deeply had the rot spread? However deep, she would clean it out. "That may be difficult as matters stand, Mother." Elida slapped the table with her free hand, a sharp crack. "I didn't ask whether it would be difficult. I said do it! And inform Maid Donnie that I invite her to dinner this evening." The woman had been persistent in trying to resume a friendship that had ended many years before. Now she knew why. "Go and do that now." A shadow crossed Tarna's face as she curtsied. "Don't worry," Elida said. "Bayanin can feel free to teach you every weave she knows." She did trust Tarna after all, and it certainly made her expression brighter, if no warmer. As the door closed behind her keeper, Elida pushed the leather folder to one side and leaned her elbows on the table, focusing on Bayanin. "Now, show me everything."
Chapter 3. At the Gardens. Arigar arrived in answer to Morden's summons, spoken into her furious dreams, to find him not yet there. That was hardly surprising. He liked to make an entrance. 11 tall armchairs, carved and gilded, sat in a circle in the middle of the striped wooden floor, but they were empty. Semirag, all in black as usual, looked around to see who had entered, then returned to her huddled conversation with Dimandret and Nasama in one corner of the room. Dimandret's hook-nosed face carried an expression of anger that only made him more striking. Not enough to attract her, of course. He was far too dangerous for that. That well-fitted coat of bronze silk with folds of snowy lace at neck and wrists suited him, however. Masana also wore the style of this age, a darker pattern-embroidered bronze. She appeared wan and subdued for some reason. almost as if she had taken ill. Well, that was possible. This age had a number of nasty diseases, and it seemed unlikely even she would trust Semirog for healing. Grendel, the only other human present, stood in the corner opposite, cradling a delicate crystal goblet filled with dark wine, but watching the trio rather than drinking. Only idiots ignored being studied by Grendel, yet the three went on with their fierce murmurs. The chairs jarred with the rest of their surroundings. The room appeared to have view walls, though the stone arch of a doorway destroyed the illusion. The chairs could have been anything here in Tel'aran'rhiod. So why not something to suit the room? And why 11, when that was surely two more than needed? Asmodean and Samael must be as dead as Balal and Robin. Why not the usual dilating door of a view room? The display made the floor seem to be surrounded by the Anseline Gardens, with Cormelind Massoon's immense sculptures of stylized humans and animals towering over low buildings themselves like delicate sculptures in spin glass. At the gardens, only the finest wines had been served, the finest dishes, and it almost always had been possible to impress a beautiful woman with large winnings at the ginger wheels, though cheating enough to win consistently had been difficult. Difficult, but necessary for a scholar who lacked wealth. All gone, in ruins by the third year of the war. A golden-haired, ever-smiling Zamara in a flowing white blouse and tight breeches bowed fluidly and offered Arengar a crystal goblet of wine on a silver tray. Graceful and beautifully androgynous, apparently human despite those dead black eyes, the creatures had been one of Agenor's less inspired creations. Still, even in their own age, when Moradin had been called Ishamael, there was no longer any doubt in their mind of who he was. He had trusted the creatures above any human servant, despite their uselessness for every other task. Somewhere he must have found a stasis box stuffed with the things. He had dozens, although he seldom brought them out, yet 10 more stood waiting, graceful while standing still. He must consider this meeting more important than most. Taking the goblet, she waved the Zamara away, though it was already turning before she gestured. She hated the creature's ability to know what was in her head. At least it could not communicate what it learned to anyone. Memories of anything but commands faded in minutes. Even Agenor possessed sense enough to see the need for that. Would he appear today? Osengar had missed every meeting since the failure at Shadar Logoth. The true question was he among the dead, or was he living in secret, perhaps at the Great Lord's direction? Either way, his absences presented delicious opportunities, but the latter presented as many dangers. Those dangers had been much on her mind lately. Casually, she strolled over to Grendel. Who do you think arrived first, Grendel? The shadow take me, whoever it was, chose a depressing setting. Lanfear had preferred meetings that floated in endless night, yet this was worse in its own way, like meeting in a cemetery. Grendel smiled thinly. At least she attempted a thin smile, but no amount of effort would make those lips thin. Lush was the word for all of Grendel. Lush and ripe and beautiful, and barely concealed by the grey mist of her streathed gown. Though perhaps she should not have worn quite so many rings, all but one adorned with gems. The coronet encrusted with rubies clashed with her sun-gold hair, too. The emerald necklace Delana had provided went much better with her own green satin silks. Of course, while the emeralds were real, her silks were a product of the world of dreams. She would have attracted too much notice in the waking world with a dress cut so low, if it would even stay up, there. And there was the slip that bared her left leg to the hip. Her legs were better than Grendel's. She had considered 2 slits. Her abilities here were not as large as some. She could not find Egwene's dreams without the girl right beside her. But she could manage the clothes she wanted. She enjoyed having her body admired, and the more she flaunted it, the more the others took her for inconsequential. I arrived first, Grendel said, frowning slightly into her wine. I have fond memories of the gardens. Arengar managed a laugh. So do I. So do I. The woman was a fool, like the rest, living in the past among the tatters of what was lost. We'll never see the gardens again, but we'll see their light. She herself was the only one of them suited to rule in the cultures. They had been her specialty before. Still, Grendel had useful skills and a wider range of contacts among the dark than she herself had, though the other woman would certainly disapprove how Arenkar meant to use them, should she learn. Has it occurred to you that all the others have alliances, while you and I stand alone? And Osengar, if he was alive, but there was no need to bring him into this. Grendel's gown turned a darker gray, regrettably obscuring the view. It was real Streeth. Arengar had found a pair of stasis boxes herself, but filled with the most appalling rubbish for the most part. Has it occurred to you that this room must have ears? The Zomaran were here when I arrived. Grendel. She purred the name. If Moradin is listening, he'll assume I'm trying to get into your bed. He knows I never made alliances with anyone. In truth, she had made several, but her allies always seemed to suffer fatal misfortunes when their usefulness ended, and they took all knowledge of the affiliations to their graves. Those who found graves. The street went black as midnight, and spots of color appeared on Grendel's creamy cheeks. Her eyes became blue ice, but her words were at odds with her face, and her gown faded to near transparency as she spoke, slowly, sounding thoughtful. An intriguing notion, one I have never before considered. I might do so now. Perhaps. You will have to convince me, though. Good. The other woman was as quick-witted as ever. It was a reminder that she must be careful. She meant to use Grendel and dispose of her, not be caught in one of her traps. I am very good at convincing beautiful women. She stretched out a hand to caress Grendel's cheek. Now it was not too soon to begin convincing the others. Besides, something more than an alliance might come of it. She'd always fancied Grendel. She no longer really remembered having been a man. In her memories, she wore the body she did now, which did make for a few oddities. Yet that body's influence had not changed everything. Her appetites had not altered, only broadened. She would very much like to have that Streeth gown. And anything else useful that Grendel might possess, of course, but she dreamed of wearing that dress sometimes. The only reason she was not wearing one now was that she would not have the other woman thinking she had imitated her. The Streeth remained barely opaque, but Grendel stepped away from the caress, looking past Arengar, turned to find Masana approaching, flanked by Demandred and Semirag. He still appeared angry, and Semirag coolly amused. Masana was still pale, but no longer subdued. No, not subdued at all. She was a hissing career, spitting venom. Why did you let her go, Arengar? You were supposed to be controlling her. Were you so busy playing your little dream games with her that you forgot to learn what she was thinking? The rebellion will fall apart without her for a figurehead. All my careful planning ruined because you couldn't keep a grasp on one ignorant girl. Arengar held on to her temper firmly. She could hold it when she was willing to make the effort. Instead of snarling, she smiled. Could Masana actually have based herself inside the White Tower? How wonderful it would be if she could find a way to split that threesome apart. I listened in on the sitting of the Rebels' Hall last night, in the world of dreams, so they could meet inside the White Tower with Egwene leading it. She's not the figurehead you believe. I've tried telling you before, but you never listened. That came out too hard. With an effort, and it required effort, she moderated her tone. Egwene told them all about the situation inside the tower, the Outlaws at one another's throats. She convinced them it's the tower that is about to fall apart, and that she might be able to help it along from where she is. Were I you, I'd worry whether the tower can hold together long enough to keep this conflict going. They're determined to hold on, Masana murmured, half under her breath. She nodded. Good. Good. Then everything is proceeding according to plan. I had been thinking I would need to stage some sort of rescue, but perhaps I can wait until Elida has broken her. Her return should create even more confusion then. You need to sow more dissension, Arengar. Before I'm done, I want those so-called Aes Sedai hating each other in their blood. Zumara appeared, bowing gracefully as it offered a tray with 3 goblets. Masana and her companions took the wine without a glance at the creature, and it bowed again before flowing away. Dissension was always something she was good at, Simmer. Demandred laughed. Arengar forced her anger down, sipping was quite a heavy aroma, if no way served at the bones. She laid her free hand on Grendel's shoulder and toyed with one of those sun-colored toys. The other woman on the streets were either she was enjoying this, or she had better control of herself than seemed possible. Semirok's smile grew more amused. She, too, took her pleasures where she found them. If you're going to fondle one another, Demon, do it in private. Jealous, Arengar murmured, and laughed lightly at his scowl. Where is the girl kept, Masana? She didn't say. Masana's big blue eyes narrowed. They were her best feature, yet only ordinary when she frowned. You want to know, so you can rescue her yourself. I won't tell you. Grendel hissed, and Arengar realized that her hand had become a fist in that gold hair, bending Grendel's head back. The other woman's face remained tranquil, but her gown was a red mist and rapidly growing darker, more opaque. Arengar loosened her grip, holding on lightly. One of the first steps was making your quarry accustomed to your touch. She did nothing to keep the anger from her voice this time, however. Her bared teeth were an undisguised snarl. I want the girl, Masana. Without her, I have much weaker tools to work with. Masana said blind calmly. Calmly. By your own account, you don't need her at all. It has been my plan from the start, Arengar. I will adapt it according to need, but it is mine. And I will decide when and where the girl is set free. No, Masana. I will decide when and where, or whether she is freed, Moradin announced, striding through the stone arch. So he had set ears in place. He was in unrelieved black this time, a black somehow darker than what Semirok wore. As usual, Mogadin and Sindane followed him, both attired in identical red and black that suited neither. What hold did he have on them? Mogadin, at least, had never willingly followed anyone. As for that beautiful bosom pale-haired doll, Sindane, Arengar had approached her just to see what might be learned, and the girl had coldly threatened to rip her heart out if Arengar touched her again. Hardly the words of someone who submitted easily. Samael appears to have resurfaced, Moradin announced, crossing the floor to take a seat. He was a big man, and he made the ornate, high-backed chair seem a throne. Mogadin and Sindane sat down to either side of him, but interestingly, not until he had. Zomaran and Snowy White were there instantly with wine, yet Moradin received his first. Whatever was at work there, Zomaran sensed it. That hardly seems possible, Grendel said as they all moved to take chairs. Her gown was dark gray now, concealing everything. He must be dead. No one moved quickly, though. Moradin was nameless, yet no one except Mogadin and Sindane was willing to display any hint of subservience. Arengar certainly was not. She took a seat across from Moradin, where she could watch him seeming to, and Mogadin and Sindane. Mogadin was so still she would have faded into the chair except for her bright dress. Sindane was a queen, her face chiseled from ice. Trying to pull down the nameless was dangerous, yet those two might hold the key, if she could figure out how to turn it. Grendel sat down beside her, and the chair was suddenly closer. Arengar could have laid her hand on the other woman's wrist, but refrained from anything more than a slow smile. It was best to keep her mind centered right then. He could never have borne staying hidden this long, Demandred put in. Lounging into his chair between Semirog and Masana, legs crossed as though perfectly at ease. That seemed doubtful. He was another who was unreconciled, she was sure. Samael needed to have every eye directed at him. Nevertheless, Samael, or someone disguised as him, gave orders to Myrtrol, and they obeyed. So it was one of the chosen. Moradin scanned around the chairs as though he could detect who it had been. Black Sa trickled across his blue eyes in a continuous stream. She had no regrets that the true power was limited to his use alone now. The price was much too high. Ishamael had certainly been at least half insane, and he still was as Moradin. How long before she could remove him? Are you going to tell us what these orders were? Semirog's tone was cool, and she sipped her wine calmly, watching Moradin over the goblet's rim. She sat very erect, but she always did. She too appeared completely at ease, yet that was unlikely. Moradin's jaw tightened. I don't know, he said at last, reluctantly. He never liked saying that. But they sent 100 Murdral and thousands of Trollocs into the ways. That sounds like Samael, Demandred said thoughtfully, twisting his goblet and studying the swirling wine. Perhaps I was mistaken. A remarkable admission coming from him, or an attempt to hide being the one who had worn Samael as a disguise. She would very much like to know who had begun playing her own game, or whether Samael really was alive. Mordin grunted sourly. Pass orders to your friends of the dark. Any report of Trollocs or Murdral outside the Blight is to be handed to me as soon as you receive it. The time of return is coming soon. No one is allowed to go adventuring on their own any longer. He studied them again, each in turn save for Mogadane and Sindane. With a smile even more languorous than Grendel's, Arengar met his gaze. Masana shrank back from it. As you learned to your sorrow, he told Masana, and impossible as it seemed, her face went paler still. She took a long drink from her goblet, her teeth clicking on the crystal. Semirog and Demandred avoided looking at her. Arengar exchanged looks with Grendel. Something had been done to punish Masana's failure to appear at Shadowloketh, but what? Once, dereliction on that scale would have meant death. They were too few for that now. Sindane and Mogadane appeared as curious as she was, so they did not know either. We can see the signs as clearly as you, Moradin, Demandred said irritably. The time is near. We need to find the rest of the seals on the Great Lord's prison. I've had my followers searching everywhere, but they've found nothing. Ah, yes, the seals. Indeed, they must be found. Moradin's smile was almost complacent. Only 3 remain, all in Althor's possession, though I doubt he has them with him. They're too susceptible to breaking now. He will have hidden them. Direct your people to places he has been. Search them yourselves. The easiest way is to kidnap Luce there. In strong contrast to her Ice Maiden appearance, Sindane's voice was breathy and sultry, a voice made for lying on soft pillows, wearing very little. There was considerable heat in those big blue eyes now, a searing heat. I can make him tell where the seals are. No, Moradin snapped, fixing her with a steady stare. You would accidentally kill him. The time and manner of Althor's death will be at my choosing, no one else. Strangely, he put his free hand to the breast of his coat, and Sindane flinched. Mogadine shivered. No one else, he repeated, in a hard voice. No one else, Sindane said. When he lowered his hand, she exhaled softly, then took a swallow of wine. Sweat glistened on her forehead. Arengar found the exchange illuminating. It seemed that once she had disposed of Moradin, she would have Mogadine and the girl on leashes. Very good indeed. Moradin straightened himself in his chair, directing that stare at the rest of them. That goes for all of you. Althor is mine. You will not harm him in any way. Sindane bent her head over her goblet, sipping, but the hatred in her eyes was plain. Grendel had said she was not Lanfear, that she was weaker in the One Power, but she surely was fixated on Althor, and she called him by the same name Lanfear had always used. If you want to kill someone, he went on, kill these two. Suddenly, the semblances of two young men in rough country clothes stood in the center of the circle, turning so that everyone could get a good look at their faces. One was tall and wide, with yellow eyes of all things, while the other was not quite slender and wore a cheeky grin. Creations of Tel'aran'rhiod, they moved stiffly, and their expressions never altered. Perrin Ibarra and Nat Cawthon are Ta'veren, easily found. Find them and kill them. Grendel laughed a mirthless laugh. Finding Ta'veren was never as simple as you made out, and now it's harder than ever. The whole pattern is in flux, full of shifts and spikes. Perrin Ibarra, Nat Cawthon, Cimarron murmured, inspecting the two shapes. So that is what they look like. Who knows, Moradin? If you had shared this with us before now, they might already have been dead. Moradin's fist came down hard on the arm of his chair. Find them. Make doubly sure that your followers know their faces. Find Ibarra and Cawthon and kill them. The time is coming, and they must be dead. Arengar took a sip of her wine. She had no objections to killing these two if she happened to come across them. But Moradin was going to be terribly disappointed over Randall Thor. Chapter 4. A Deal. Perrin sat Stepper's saddle a little back from the edge of the trees and watched the large meadow where red and blue wildflowers were beginning to burst into the brown grass that the now vanished snows had flattened into a mat. This stand was mainly leather leaf that kept its broad dark foliage through the winter, but only a few small pale leaves decorated the branches of the sweet gums among them. The dun stallion stamped a hoof with an impatience Perrin shared, though he let none of it show. The sun stood almost overhead. He had been waiting there nearly an hour. A stiff, steady breeze blew out of the west down the meadow toward him. That was good. Every so often, his gauntleted hand stroked a nearly straight branch hacked from an oak, thicker than his forearm and more than twice as long, that lay across the saddle in front of him. For half its length, he had shaved two sides, flat and smooth. The meadow, ringed by huge oaks and leatherleaf, towering pine, and shorter sweet gum, was less than 600 paces wide, though longer than that. The branch should be broad enough. He had planned for every possibility he could imagine. The branch fit more than one. My lady first, you should return to the camp, Galen said, not for the first time, rubbing irritably at his red eye patch. His crimson-plumed helmet hung from the pommel of his saddle, leaving his shoulder-length gray hair uncovered. He had been heard to say, in Berelane's hearing, that most of those gray hairs were presents from her. His black warhorse tried to take a nip at Stepper, and he reined the heavy-chested gelding sharply without taking his attention from Berelane. He had counseled against her coming in the first place. Grady can take you back and return while the rest of us wait a while longer to see whether the Shanshan are going to show up. I will remain, Captain. I will remain. Berelane's tone was firm and calm, yet beneath her
I'll be right back, everyone.
an edge of concern. She was not so certain as she made herself sound. She had taken to wearing a light perfume that smelled of flowers. Perrin sometimes found himself trying to puzzle out which flowers, but he was too focused for idle thoughts today. Vexation spiked in Anura's scent, though her ageless, eye-to-eye face, framed by dozens of thin braids, remained as smooth as ever. But then, the big-nosed Grey Sister had smelled vexed ever since the rift between her and Berelane. It was her own fault, visiting Messina behind Berelane's back. She also had counseled Berelane to stay behind. Minora edged her brown mare closer to the first of Mayan, and Berylane moved her white mare just that far away without so much as a glance in her advisor's direction. Vexation spiked again. Berylane's red silk dress, heavily embroidered in golden scrollwork, displayed more bosom than she had in some time, though a wide necklace of fire drops and opals provided a degree of modesty. A wide matching belt supporting a jeweled dagger cinched her waist. The narrow crown of Mayenne, resting on her black hair and holding a golden hawk in flight above her brows, appeared ordinary beside the belt and necklace. She was a beautiful woman, the more so, it seemed to him, since she had stopped chasing him, though still not a patch on Fail, of course. Minora wore an unadorned gray riding dress, but most of them were in their best. For Perrin, that was a dark green silk coat, with silver embroidery covering the sleeves and shoulders. He was not much for fancy clothes. Fail had chivied him into buying what little he had. Well, she had chivied him gently, but today he needed to impress. If the wide, plain leather belt fastened over the coat spoiled the impression a little, so be it. She must come, Arganda muttered. A short, stocky man, Aleandra's first captain, had not removed his silvered helmet with its 3 short white plumes, and he sat his saddle, easing his sword in its scabbard as though awaiting a charge. His breastplate was silver-plated too. He would be visible for miles out in the sunlight. She must. The prophet says they won't, Aram put in, and not softly, heeling his leggy gray up beside Stepper. The brass wolf-head pommel of his sword stuck up over the shoulder of his green-striped coat. Once he had seemed too good-looking for a man, but now his face grew grimmer every day. There was a haggardness about him, his eyes sunken and his mouth tight. The prophet says either that, or it's a trap. He says we shouldn't trust the Shan Chan. Perrin held his silence, but he felt his own spike of irritation, as much with himself as with the one-time tinker. Bulwer had informed him that Aram had begun spending time with Messima, yet it had seemed unnecessary to tell the man not to let Messima know everything Perrin was doing. There was no putting the egg back into the shell, but he would know better in the future. A workman should know his tools, and not use them for breaking. The same went for people. As for Messima, no doubt he was afraid they would meet someone who knew he himself was dealing with the Shan Chan. They were a large party, though most would remain right there among the trees. 50 of Berylane's winged guards in rimmed red helmets and red breastplates, scarlet streamers floating from their slender steel-tipped lances, were mounted behind the golden hawk-gun blue of Mayenne, rippling on the breeze. Beside them, 50 Gildanan in burnished breastplates and dark green conical helmets sat their horses behind Gildan's 3 silver stars on red. The streamers on their lances were green. They made a brave show, yet all of them together were far less deadly than with his weathered farmer's face, even if they made him appear drab in his plain black coat with a silver sword pin on the high collar. He knew it, whether or not they did, and he stood beside his bay gelding with the ease of a man resting before the day's labor. In contrast, Leof Torfin and Todd Alcar, the only other 2 Rivers men present, were still all but bouncing in their saddles with excitement despite the long wait. It might have taken some of their pleasure away had they known they had been chosen in large part because they came nearest fitting their borrowed coats of dark, finely woven green wool. Leof carried Perrin's own red wolf-head banner, Todd the red eagle of Manetheren, both rippling on staffs, a little longer than the lances. They had almost come to blows over who was to carry which. Perrin hoped it was not because neither wanted to carry the red-bordered wolf head. Leof looked happy enough. Todd looked ecstatic. Of course, he did not know why Perrin had brought the thing along. In any trade, you needed to make the other fellow think he was getting something extra, as Matt's father often said. Colors swirled in Perrin's head, and for a brief instant he thought he saw Matt talking to a small, dark woman. He shook off the image. Now, today, were all that mattered. Fail was all that mattered. They will come, Arganda snapped in answer to Aram. Then he glared through the face bars of his helmet as if expecting a challenge. But if they don't, Galen demanded, his one eye scowling as fiercely as Arganda's pair. His red-lacquered breastplate was not much better than Arganda's silvered one. Small chance they could be talked into pinning them something dull. What if it is a trap? Arganda growled, almost a guttural growl. The man was near the end of his tether. The breeze brought the scent of horses only moments before Perrin's ears caught the first blue tits trills, too distant for anyone else to hear. They came from the trees flanking the meadow. Large parties of men, perhaps unfriendly, were entering the woods. More trills sounded closer. "They're here," he said, which earned him looks from Arganda and Galen. He tried to avoid revealing the acuteness of his hearing, or his sense of smell, yet that pair had been on the point of coming to blows. The relaying trills grew nearer, and everyone could hear them. The two men's looks grew odd. "I can't risk the lady first if there's any chance of a trap," Galen said, buckling on his helmet. They all knew what the signal meant. "The choice is mine, Captain," Verlaine replied before Perrin could open his mouth. "And your safety is my responsibility, my lady first." Verlaine drew breath, her face darkening, but Perrin got there first. "I told you how we're going to spring that trap, if that's what it is. You know how suspicious the Shon-Chen are. Likely they're worried about us ambushing them." Galen harumphed loudly. The patience in Verlaine's smell flickered, then settled in again, rocked steady. "You should listen to him, Captain," she said with a smile for Perrin. "He knows what he is doing." A party of riders appeared at the far end of the meadow and drew rein. Talonvar was easy to pick out. In a dark coat and mounted on a good dappled gray, he was the only man not wearing armor vividly striped in red and yellow and blue. The other pair, unarmored, were women, one in blue with red on her skirts and breast, the other in gray. The sun reflected off something connecting them. So, a Sul'dam and Damani. There had been no mention of that in all the negotiations carried out through Talonvar, but Perrin had counted on it. "It's time," she said, gathering Stepper's reins one-handed. "Before she decides we're not coming." Anura managed to get close enough to lay a hand on Verlaine's arm for a moment before the other woman could move her mare away. "You should let me come with you, Verlaine. You may need my counsel, yes? This sort of negotiation is my specialty. I suspect the Shon-Chen know an Aes Sedai face by now, don't you, Anura? I hardly think they'd negotiate with you. Besides," Verlaine added in a too-sweet voice, "you must remain here to assist Master Grady." Spots of color appeared briefly on the Aes Sedai's cheeks, and her wide mouth tightened. It had taken the wise ones to make her agree to take orders from Grady today, though Perrin was just as glad he did not know how they had done it. And she had been trying to wiggle out ever since leaving the camp. "You stay too," Perrin said when Aram made to ride forward. "You've been hot-headed lately, and I won't risk you saying or doing the wrong thing out there. I won't risk Fail on it." It's true. No need to say he would not risk the man carrying what was said out there back to Massima. "You understand?" Bubbles of disappointment filled Aram's assent, but he nodded, however reluctantly, and rested his hands on the pommel of his saddle. He might come close to worshipping Massima, but he would give his life 100 times over rather than risk Fail's. On purpose, anyway. What he did without thinking was another matter. Perrin rode out of the trees, flanked by Arganda on one side and Verlaine and Galen on the other. The banners followed behind, and 10 Mayenners and 10 Gildanen in a column of twos. As they walked their mounts forward, the Shon-Chen started toward them, also in column, with Talonvar riding beside the leaders, one on a roan, the other a bay. The horses' hooves made no sound in the thick mat of dead grass. The forest had gone silent, even to Perrin's ears. While the Mayenners and Gildanen spread out in a line, and most of the Shon-Chen in their red-depleted armor did the same, Perrin and Verlaine advanced toward Talonvar, and 2 of the armored Shon-Chen, one with 3 thin blue plumes on that lacquered helmet that was so like an insect's head, the other with 2. The Sultan and Damani came too. They met in the middle of the meadow, surrounded by wild flowers and silence, with 6 paces between them. As Talonvor positioned himself to one side between the 2 groups, the armored Shonchan removed their helmets with hands and steel-backed gauntlets that were striped like the rest of their armor. The 2-plumed helmet revealed a yellow-haired man with half a dozen scars seaming his square face. He was a hard-bitten man who smelled of amusement, strangely, but it was the other who interested Perrin. Mounted on the bay, a trained warhorse, if he had ever seen one, she was tall and broad-shouldered for a woman, though lean otherwise and not young. Gray marked the temples of her close-cut, tightly curled black hair. As dark as good topsoil, she displayed only 2 scars, one slanting across her left cheek. The other, on her forehead, had taken part of her right eyebrow. Some people thought scars a sign of toughness. It seemed to Perrin that fewer scars meant that you knew what you were doing. Confidence filled the scent of her in the breeze. Her gaze flickered across the fluttering banners. He thought she paused slightly on Manethran's red eagle, and again on Mayen's golden hawk, yet she quickly settled to studying him. Her expression never altered a whit, but when she noticed his yellow eyes, something unidentifiable entered her scent, something sharp and hard. When she saw the heavy blacksmith's hammer in its loop on his belt, the strange scent grew. I give you Perrin Tebashir Ebara, Lord of the 2 Rivers, Liege Lord to Queen Aleandra of Gildan, Talonvor announced, raising a hand toward Perrin. He claimed the Shonchan were sticklers for formality, but Perrin had no idea whether this was a Shonchan ceremony or something from Andor. Talonvor could have made it up for all of him. I give you Berlain Sir Payandrag Peyron, first of Mayen, blessed of the light, defender of the waves, high seat of House Peyron. With a bow to the pair of them, he shifted his reins and raised the other hand toward the Shonchan. I give you Banner General Tylee Kiergan of the ever-victorious army in service to the Empress of Shonchan. I give you Captain Bakayar Mishima of the ever-victorious army in service to the Empress of Shonchan. Another bow, and Talonvor turned his gray to ride back to a place beside the banners. His face was as grim as Aram's, but he smelled of honey. I'm glad he didn't name you the Wolf King, my lord, the Banner General called. The way she slurred her words, Perrin had to listen hard to make out what she was saying. Otherwise, I'd think Tarmangatten was us. You know the prophecies of the dragon. When the Wolf King carries the hammer, thus are the final days known. When the fox marries the raven, and the trumpets of battle are blown. I never understood that second line myself. And you, my lady, Sir Payandrag, that would mean from Payandrag? My family is descended from Ata Payandrag Tamriel, Berlain replied, holding her head high. An eddy in the breeze brought a whiff of pride among the patients and perfume. They had agreed that Perrin was to do all of the talking. She was there to dazzle the Shonchan with a beautiful young ruler, or at least to lend weight to Perrin with it. But he supposed she had to answer a direct question. Tylee nodded as though that were exactly the answer she expected. That makes you a distant cousin of the imperial family, my lady. No doubt the Empress, may she live forever, will honor you, so long as you make no claim to Hawkwing's empire yourself, anyway. The only claim I make is to Mayen, Berlain said proudly, and that I will defend to my last breath. I didn't come here to talk about the prophecies or Hawkwing or your Empress, Perrin said irritably. For the second time in a matter of moments, those colors tried to coalesce in his head, only to be dispelled. He had no time. The Wolf King? Appa would come as near to laughing as a wolf could over that. Any wolf would. Still, he was chill. He had not realized that he was mentioned in the prophecies, and his hammer was a harbinger of the last battle. But nothing mattered except Fail.
He'll be right back.
Her, and whatever it took to free her. The agreement for this meeting was no more than 30 in either party. It that you have men in the woods on both sides of us. A lot of men. So do you, Mishima said, with grin distorted by a white scar that met the corner of his mouth. Or you wouldn't know about ours. His drawl was worse than hers. Perrin kept his eyes on the Banner General. As long as they both remain, there's the chance of accidents. I don't want any accidents. I want my wife back from the Shido. And how do you propose we avoid accidents? Mishima said, idly flipping his reins. He sounded as though the question was not urgent. It seemed Ty Lee was content to let him do the talking while she observed Perrin's reactions. Are we supposed to trust you if we send our men out first, or you to trust us if we ask you to withdraw first? On the heights, the paths are paved with daggers. There isn't much room for trust. I suppose we could both order our men to pull back at the same time, but one side might cheat. Perrin shook his head. You're going to have to trust me, Banner General. I have no reason to want to attack you or capture you, and every reason not to. I can't be sure of the same about you. You might think capturing the first of Mayenne worth a little betrayal. Berlin laughed softly. It was time for the branch. Not just to force the Shan out of the woods first, but to convince them that they needed what he could offer. He stood the branch upright on the saddle in front of him. I expect your men are probably good soldiers. My men aren't soldiers, though they fought Trollocs and Shido and done well against both. Gripping the branch at its base, he held it high overhead, the shaved sides uppermost and facing either side. But they're used to hunting lions and leopards and ridge cats come down out of the mountains after our flocks, and wild boar and bear, animals that hunt back, in forests not much different from this. The branch tried to twist violently in his gauntlet fist as twin impacts, not a heartbeat apart, shivered down his arm. He lowered the branch to display two pile arrows, their chisel-shaped heads driven clear of the tough wood on either side. 300 paces was a long range for that target, but he had chosen John Dinbaran and Jory Conger to make the shots. They were the best he had. If it comes down to it, your men won't even see who's killing them, and that armor won't do much good against a Two Rivers longbow. I hope it doesn't come to that. With all of his strength, he heaved the branch up into the air. My eyes, Mishima growled, a hand going to his sword even as he tried to rein the roan back and watch Perrin and the branch all at the same time. His helmet toppled from his saddle to the grass. The Banner General made no move toward her sword, though she also tried watching Perrin and the branch. At first she did. Then her gaze followed only the branch as it continued to climb until it hung centered between them 100 feet in the air. Abruptly, a ball of flame enveloped the branch, so fierce that Perrin felt the heat as from an open furnace. Berlane put a hand up to shield her face. Ty Lee merely watched thoughtfully. The fire lasted just moments, yet that was enough to leave only ash drifting on the breeze when it vanished. Ash, and two plummeting specks that fell into the dry grass. Small flames shot up immediately and began growing, spreading. Even the war horses snorted in fear. Berlane's mare danced in an attempt to fight her reins and flee. Perrin muttered a curse. He should have thought of the arrowheads, and started to dismount to stomp out the fire, but before he could swing his leg over the saddle, the flames vanished, leaving only thin tendrils of smoke rising from a patch of blackened grass. Good Nori, the Sultan murmured, patting the demoni. Nori is a wonderful demoni. The gray-clad woman smiled shyly at the praise. Despite her words, the Sultan looked worried. So, Tadi said, you have a Marath? She paused, pursing her lips. You have an Aes Sedai with you. More than one? No matter. I can't say the Aes Sedai I've seen have impressed me very much. Not Marath Demani, my general, the Sultan said quietly. Tadi sat very still, studying Perrin intently. Asherman, she said at last. not a question. You begin to interest me, my lord. Then maybe one last thing will convince you, Aaron said. Todd, roll that banner around the staff and bring it here. Hearing nothing behind him, he looked over his shoulder. Todd was staring at him with a stricken look. Todd? Giving himself a shake, Todd began winding the red eagle around its staff. He still looked unhappy when he rode forward and handed it to Perrin, though. He sat there with his hand still stretched out as though hoping the staff might be returned to him. Heeling stepward toward the Seanchan, Perrin held the banner in front of him in his fist parallel to the ground. The Two Rivers was the heart of Manetheren, Banner General. The last king of Manetheren died in a battle right where Emmons Field, the village I was born in, grew up. Manetheren is in our blood, but the Shido have my wife prisoner. To free her, I'll give up any claim to reviving Manetheren. Sign any sort of oath on it you want. That claim would be a field of brambles for you, Seanchan. You could be the one who cleared that field without a drop of bloodshed. Behind him, someone groaned miserably. He thought it was Todd. Suddenly, the breeze was a gale howling in the opposite direction, pelting them with grit, blowing so hard that he had to cling to his saddle to keep from being knocked out of it. His coat seemed on the point of being ripped from his body. Where had the grit come from? The forest was carpeted inches deep with dead leaves. The tempest stank of burned sulfur, too, sharp enough to burn Perrin's nose. The horses tossed their heads, mouths open, but the roar of the wind buried their frightened whinnies. Only moments the ferocious wind lasted, and then as suddenly as it came, it was gone, leaving only the breeze blowing the other way. The horses stood shivering, snorting, and tossing their heads and rolling their eyes. Perrin patted Stepper's neck and murmured soothing sounds, yet it had little effect. The Banner General made a strange gesture and muttered, Avert the shadow. Where under the light did that come from? I've heard tales of strange things happening. Or was it more convincing on your part, my lord? No, Perrin said truthfully. Nield possessed abilities with weather, it had turned out, but not Grady. What does it matter where it came from? Tali looked at him thoughtfully, then nodded. What does it matter? She said, sounding as if she did not necessarily agree with him. We have stories about Manetheren. There would be brambles underfoot and no boots. Half of Amadicia is buzzing with talk of you and that banner, come to bring Manetheren alive again and save Amadicia from us. Mishima, sound withdrawal. Without hesitation, the yellow-haired man raised a small, straight horn that was hanging by a red cord around his neck. Blowing 4 shrill notes, he repeated the sequence twice before letting the horn fall to swing against his chest. My part is done, Tali said. Perrin put back his head and shouted as loudly and distinctly as he could. Daniel, tell! When the last Seanchan moves below the end of the meadow, gather everyone and join Grady. The Banner General stuck her little finger into her ear and wiggled it about in spite of her gauntlet. You have a strong voice, she said dryly. Only then did she reach out to take the banner staff, laying it carefully across the saddle in front of her. She did not look at it again, but one hand stroked the banner itself, perhaps unconsciously. Now, what do you have that can aid my plan, my lord? Mishima hooked an ankle behind the tall pommel of his saddle and lowered himself to catch up his helmet. The wind had rolled it across the beaten-down grass, halfway back to the line of Seanchan soldiers. From the trees came a brief snatch of lark song, then another. The Seanchan were withdrawing, and they felt the wind too. No matter. Not nearly as many men as you already have, Perrin admitted. Not that are trained soldiers, at least. But I have Asha, and Aes Sedai, and wise ones who can channel, and you'll need every one of them. She opened her mouth, and he raised a hand. I'll want your word that you won't try putting collars on them. He glanced pointedly at the Sul'dam and Mani. The Sul'dam was keeping her eyes on Ty Lee, awaiting orders, but at the same time she was idly stroking the other woman's hair the way you might stroke a cat to soothe it. And Nori looked to be almost purring. Light. Your word that they're safe from you. Them and anyone in the camp wearing a white robe. Most of those aren't Shido anyway, and the only Aiel among them I know about are friends of mine. Tali shook her head. You have strange friends, my lord. In any case, we found people from Cairien and Amadisia with bands of Shido and let them go. Though most of the Cairienan seem too disoriented to know what to do with themselves. The only ones in white we keep are the Aiel. These sky shine make marvelous Dakovel, unlike the rest. Still, I'll agree to letting your friends go free, and your Aes Sedai and Nashaman. Putting an end to this gathering is very important. Tell me where they are, and I can start incorporating you into my plans. Perrin rubbed the side of his nose with a finger. It seemed unlikely many of those guys shine were Shido, but he was not about to tell her that. Let them have their chance at freedom when their year and a day was up. It'll have to be my plan, I'm afraid. Savannah will be a tough nut to crack, but I've worked out how. For one thing, she has maybe 100,000 Shido with her, and she's gathering in more. Not everyone is Algaid Siswai, but any adult will pick up a spear if they need to. Savannah. Tali gave a pleased smile. We've heard that name. I would dearly love to present Savannah the Jumai Shido to the Captain General. Her smile faded. 100,000 is many more than I expected, but not more than I can handle. We've fought these Aiel before, in Amadisia, Mishima. Riding back to join them, Mishima laughed, but it was a harsh sound, no amusement in it. That we have, Banner General. They're fierce fighters, disciplined and crafty, but they can be handled. You surround one of their bands, their sets, with 3 or 4 Damani, and pound them until they give up. It's a nasty business. They have their families with them, but they surrender the sooner for it. I understand you have a dozen or so Damani, Perrin said. But is that enough to face 300 or 400 wise ones channeling? The Banner General frowned. You mentioned that before, wise ones channeling. Every band we've caught had its wise ones, but not one of them could channel. That's because all the Shido have are with Savannah, Perrin replied. At least 300 and maybe 4. The wise ones with me are sure of it. Tali and Mishima exchanged a look, and the Banner General sighed. Mishima looked glum. Well, she said, orders or no orders, that puts an end to finishing this quietly. The daughter of the 9 moons will have to be disturbed if I must apologize for it to the Empress. May she live forever. Like day I will. The daughter of the 9 moons. Some high-ranking Sean-chan, apparently. But how was she supposed to be disturbed by any of this? Mishima grimaced, a fearsome sight with all those scars crisscrossing his face. I read there were 400 Damani on each side at Samalaran, and that was a slaughterhouse. Half the Imperial Army on the field dead, and better than 3 out of 4 among the rebels. Nevertheless, Mishima, we have it to do. Or rather, someone else does. You might escape an apology, but I won't. What under the light was so upsetting about an apology? The woman smelled resigned. Unfortunately, it will take weeks, if not months, to gather enough soldiers and the money to quit the spoil. I thank you for your offer of help, my lord. It will be remembered. Tali held out the banner. You'll want this back, since I can't deliver my side of the bargain, but a piece of advice. The ever-victorious army may have other tasks in front of it for the nonce, but we won't let anyone take momentary advantage of the situation to set himself up as a king.
You lay down?
We mean to reclaim this land, not divided into parcels. And we mean to keep our lands, Berlin said fiercely, making her mare lunge across the few paces of dead grass between her and the Shanchan. The mare was eager to lunge, eager to run away from that wind, and she had trouble reining the animal in. Even her scent was fierce. No patience now. She smelled like a she-wolf defending her injured mate. I've heard that your ever-victorious army is misnamed. I've heard the Dragon Reborn defeated you soundly to the south. Don't you ever think that Perenebara can't do the same? Light, and he had been worried over Aram's hot-headedness. I don't want to defeat anybody except the Shido, Perrin said firmly, fighting off the image that tried to form in his mind. He folded his hands on the pommel of his saddle. Stepper seemed to be settling down at least. The stallion still gave small shivers now and then, but he had stopped rolling his eyes. I've heard of several men being caught that way. They might have cartloads of... And as for getting the tea, maybe this will help. From his left gauntlet, he pulled a folded, grease-stained piece of paper. Ali's eyebrows rose as she read it. Perrin had the short text by heart. The bearer of this stands under my personal protection. In the name of the Empress, may she live forever, give him whatever aid he requires in service to the Empire, and speak of it to no one but me. He had no idea who Surath Sabel Nadarath was, but if she signed her name to something like that, she had to be important. Maybe she was this daughter of the Nine Moons. Handing the paper to Mishima, the Banner General stared at Perrin. That sharp, hard scent was back, stronger than ever. Aye, said I, Asherman, aye, your eyes, that hammer, now this. Who are you? Mishima whistled through his teeth. Surath herself, he murmured. I'm a man who wants his wife back, Perrin said, and I'll deal with the Dark One to get her. He avoided looking at the Sultan and Damani. He was not far short of making a deal with the Dark One. Do we have a bargain? Tali looked at his outstretched hand, then took it. She had a firm grip. A deal with the Dark One. But he would do whatever it took to get Fail free.
Chapter 5. Something strange.
Alright, everyone, I'm gonna call into this live for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by. Definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.